All right, so let's get started. I see some participants are coming in. Good morning, good evening, good midday to everybody. Hi, Steve, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you? And thank you to everybody who's joining in this session. I really appreciate taking some time out in your busy days and evenings to listen to this. So thank you for that.
So let's get started. So first of all, I would like to introduce Dr. Steve, actually, and then we'll spend some time to discuss your findings, and of course, a couple of questions around yourself. And you guys will have, let's say, 15-20 minutes at the end of the call for your questions. As you see, there's the Q&A. You will be able to use the Q&A for your questions at the end. But before kicking off, let me introduce you, Steve, to everybody here. Dr. Broadhurst. You are based in Manchester, in the UK. You are now an independent consultant, change agent, and expert in international business admin. You gain success in single, multi-site, demanding, and international, national, regional headquarter organizations, like, for example, the BBC in the UK, Airbus, Bombardier, HSBC, McDonald's, Catalan or Kraft, Weetabix in the US, as well as SKF in Sweden. So you've been working for them. All those various and consistent applications have all been underpinned over the past 35 years with yourself, investing in yourself, you self-funded continuous personal and professional development and education. And that culminated in 2019 in an executive doctorate in business administration, or EDBA, from Ecole de Ponts in Paris. So this is where we met, actually, back then. You have many interests of a wide range. You also wrote a book. We can find this book on Amazon UK. And your interests are around mental health, well-being, behavioral, social sciences, humanities. And you, based on those interests, to write your book. The title is called Spirituality Within the Workplace, a tool for survivalism, sustainability, and growth in turbulent, interconnected markets, interconnected relationships, and individuals. So that book was published in April 2021, so a year ago. So congrats for continuing your thesis with the book.
Thank you.
It's quite a journey as well. So let's get started. First of all, I would like to know, why did you pick that topic? Why is this, why is this topic on spirituality in the workplace important for you and for leaders?
So where it started from was very much from on a personal basis. So I grew up in a family, shall we say, that had two alcoholics in it that were very, very close to me. And growing up in an alcoholic environment is challenging. And when it's people who you love and you see them drinking to excess and all the problems that caused a problem to me. It made me suffer seeing the people I love basically drinking themselves to death. And I did everything I could to try and stop them to no avail. Now, that was growing up in an alcoholic environment where people's suffering affected me. And as time went by and I started to lead my life, the various decisions and actions that I undertook, shall we say, went spectacularly wrong. And that caused me to suffer as a result of what I'd done in the world to cause that, not intentionally, but that was the byproduct. So I was suffering on 2 points: from what people had caused me to suffer by worrying about other people, and then suffering that of the events that I brought upon myself. So I was fairly down and out. Well, not quite out. You cannot really go through all those events. I suppose I had two choices: either blame the people in the world around me, or I could look at myself and say, okay, what is it about me that was the common denominator in all those factors that's caused me to suffer as a person. And somebody suggested going to Al-Anon. And Al-Anon is the family of friends of alcoholics. It was born out of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's a very spiritual, psychological and scientific program. And it's there that gave me the tools and techniques to look at myself, not beat myself up or put myself down, but look at my life and the way it was going, what had led up to those events and how those events were having an effect on me. And then there's 12 simple steps in these programs for very complex people and situations, but that's by the by. So step 12 is to carry these principles in all our affairs. And I took those affairs of meaning work as well. So I took all my learnings from that 12-step program, like I say, for family of friends of alcoholics, which is fairly unique because every other 12-step program revolves around addiction behaviors. Well, we're not addicted, but we suffer as a result of other people's addiction. It's the only program that doesn't have that addiction part of it. And I started to apply the principles in both my personal and my professional life. And I started to conduct myself differently at work. And from there, I saw absolutely different results. It was fairly successful, as you kindly read out in my introduction. And I thought, right, okay, that's interesting. What is it that I'm doing differently than what I've done before that's causing this positive difference in what I'm trying to achieve? So I think that answers your question in terms of what took me to spirituality and how I apply it in the workplace. I think the difference is I apply my spiritual beliefs both personally and professionally. So when I did the dissertation, it was obviously, it's a business degree. So I had to put more emphasis on what the difference is to be made at work. And that's what I based my research dissertation on, what the differences were, if anything at all.
So can you describe to us briefly what your research is about in a couple of sentences?
So my research question, the best way of answering that is to tell you my research question. So it's what challenges and opportunities do business leaders face in the UK, what challenges and opportunities do business leaders face in the UK in the consideration and application of spirituality in the workplace? So the challenges around this are spirituality is a step too far in many people's minds, both personally and professionally. When you look at it professionally, when there is no common definition that everybody agrees with of spirituality, and there's no measure of spirituality, and in a professional place, what you can't measure and understand, you can't manage, the business world shies away from stuff like that. However, just because we might not understand it and we can't put a definition on it or a clear definition on it or a commonly agreed definition on it, hasn't stopped millions and millions of people the world over from practicing it. So I'd say from a personal perspective, it's a step too far. The word spirituality has been misconstrued, it's been misunderstood, it's been repackaged and revamped, and it's been twisted in different ways. So for me, it's lost its clear meaning of what it's all about. From a business perspective, if it's not taught in a business college or a university or on a course, or consultants don't come in and teach it and show it and work it, it doesn't tend to have much credibility. So in the face of that, applying it and understanding it and knowing what the possibilities and the opportunities are behind it is a long way off happening.
So what is it then? Can you tell us what you said? There's no definition, no measure, the meaning got lost. So what is spirituality, or what is it not about? What did you find in your research?
Well, what's interesting is what it isn't about. that was on the opening label of this conversation. So let's go through what it isn't about. Now, bearing in mind, I interviewed 11 people for my dissertation, and a further 52 people from a book. So 63 participants in the book and 11 in the dissertation. So what I come out with is all relative. So in other words, it complements each other. It's all in relationship to each other. So first and foremost, what clearly came out was that spirituality isn't religious. So a lot of people, when I asked the question, are you religious? Albeit one participant said that they were religious. But the interesting part was, and then I asked the other question, is, are you spiritual? Well, of course, the answer was yes, because otherwise I wouldn't be interviewing them for the book or the dissertation. So the interesting part was the one person who said they were religious said they were also spiritual. And that you can have spirituality without religion, but they realized you can't have religion without spirituality, which I thought was very interesting. Now, for the remaining participants, they'd all pretty much renounced religion. They'd walked away from religion. They were Catholics, they were practicing Catholics, Protestants, all the mainstream, but they'd actually renounced religion and turned to spirituality. So when I asked them the question about God, 10 of the 11, and again in proportion to the book as well, didn't believe in God. They'd actually turned away from God. They had what you call a higher power instead. So that was interesting. Spirituality was held up in its own right. The other thing what came out of it, the major surprise was it was viewed spirituality as very much being selfish. It's about looking after yourself. It's about caring for yourself, looking after yourself, putting yourself first, which was actually quite surprising because that goes against all research around servant leadership. You should love everybody, like everybody, think of everybody else, cater for everybody else's wants and needs. Not at all. Absolutely not at all. It was about looking after yourself. And if you look after yourself, you've got more to give others because you feel good in yourself. But I'm sure we'll touch upon that as the conversation goes by. So as a spin-off from that, then it wasn't about altruism. On the back of that, it wasn't about being nice and kind and good and decent and giving to other people. It wasn't about mindfulness. It wasn't about liking and loving everybody and everything. Not at all. Because if you don't like and love yourself, how can you expect anybody else to like and love you at the same time? So that comes back to the selfish side of it. It's not about poverty. It's not about being on a journey, because a journey has a beginning and an end, and usually it ends at the same point as where you began. And by definition, a journey is arduous. It's about a pathway that you continue to walk along as you will and where you want to be on that pathway. It's not about sacrifice. It's not about perfection, which again, many people think being spiritual means aiming for perfection. It's not about enlightenment, and it's not about spiritualism. And two of my research candidates confuse spirituality with spiritualism. And a lot of people make that mistake as well. As I said, it's not about being selflessness. It's about being selfish. It's not about failure. It's about temporary defeat. It's not about having fear. It's about taking exciting risks. It's actually not about happiness, because happiness is subjective. It's temporary. It's about serenity. And it's not about what you should be and should do. Spirituality of this nature doesn't tell you what you should be and should do. It's about what you could be and will be. And it really teaches you to make choices, is to be assertive, to create boundaries, and to have courage. It's about having courage to change. And what I mean by that is we're all faced with problems and situations where we make a decision. We've got the decision to stay in that situation, to leave that situation, or to remove the situation from us. So there's a big list there that actually came out that goes against certainly the research I read and the common thinking and feeling and understanding that is around and about in an abundance. But my research for both my dissertation and my book clearly refuted what the common misconception is of what spirituality, what people think it's all about.
Is this something that you expected to find, or did you have any surprising finding?
I was surprised over the selfishness part of it, and I was actually surprised over people turning their backs on religion. You know, clearly, they didn't want anything to do with religion. They've been brought up in religious practices and the dogma around all that and the scriptures around all that. Nearly all turned their back on religion, and also, as I mentioned before, didn't believe in God. So that surprised me. And the genuine part was when I was talking to these people, it made me feel very humble, because what brought them to spirituality was the suffering that they'd experienced, shall I say, far worse than what I'd been through. And they'd found that comfort and that courage and that strength in the spirituality, where, quite frankly, a lot of the participants said they were at that rock bottom where they would have either committed murder or suicide. That's how bad it was. Now, I personally didn't take any antidepressants, and neither did most of my participants. They purely got their strength, faith, and hope through their spiritual practices, the tools and techniques behind it, and living their life the best way they could through the perspective of their situation, and having courage and making a difference to their life and bringing quality. So it was very much, the surprise was how far these people had come under brutal circumstances, either living with alcoholics or suffering as a result of other things, to being healthy, balanced, decent, good, kind, not bitter in any respect, more objective in terms of what they've been through and the journey, which is a horrible word, or the path that they've been on, to enable them to lead this healthy and productive lifestyle, and to change their viewpoints of all what's happened to them completely, and lead a decent, balanced life. So it was the magnitude of change and what brought them to that change that made the difference.
You mentioned that suffering was your entry point, and also for your participants, right? So that's what got them into spirituality. Your field of inquiry was the organizations. There's lots of fear or suffering in organizations, or mental health, right, with COVID, and even without COVID, or bullying, these kind of things. So what would leaders, organizations, practitioners find useful in your research?
Exactly. So we have to remember this is a business doctorate. And yep. So what I've always spoken about, what's that got to do with a business degree? So the simple fact is, what links into all that is, and you've said it, Anne Isabelle, is the suffering. So there's a measure in itself. So when I did my dissertation, according to the Office of National Statistics, which is a government-backed body, between 2017 and 2018, there was 131.2 million days lost through sickness in the UK alone. Now that's an awful lot of days. The first cause was coughs and colds and people having a day off or whatever. The second biggest cause, the second biggest lump of that number, was due to stress and suffering at work. And when they interviewed what was causing that stress and suffering, when they interviewed the participants, what was causing that stress and suffering, a majority said it was due to their managers and leaders inflicting, who were bullies, who were unfair, and they were mistreated that way. They were abused at work, basically. Now, for the purpose of this conversation, I looked at this year's report. So between 2020 and 2021, there was 149 million days lost through sickness and in health. So it's gone up. Now, what the interesting part about that is, here in the UK, the last 2 years has been a lockdown. So a lot of people have not been working, or they've been working from home. So does that mean managers have found a way to bully over the airwaves? Does it mean that bullying has been replaced by suffering by now being at home, and people are suffering through stress through the home situation? Nevertheless, whatever the reason is, that suffering has gone up. So the key word is again suffering. So we suffer ourselves, other people cause us to suffer. The figures are there in terms of, wow, they are eye-watering numbers. So what is it, what we can do, if anything at all, to reduce stress and suffering at work, which of course will be more productive for organisations? So what do we need to do as individuals, and what do organisations need to consider to help to alleviate those numbers? So if they're numbers in the UK, what's it like the world over? And I'll just say this: millions and millions of billions of pounds and dollars and yen are spent on business consultants and business schools and courses that teaches leaders how they should approach their work. But according to these numbers, they don't work. And even Maslow said all those years ago, today's leadership models are no longer fit for purpose. So what else can be considered that we could think about and utilize to help us in our workplace? And I'll just say this while I've got the airwaves. Maslow was actually quite spiritual. And the top of his hierarchy of needs is self-actualization. And that very much came out within my research as well, about looking at yourself, how you conduct yourself, etc., etc. So it all links up. There's something going on. What's going on? What can we do? Because what we're doing isn't really working.
You mentioned earlier that one of your findings was about being selfish. What do you mean?
So when you're in an abusive relationship, or you're being abused through external factors, selfish in this context is very much looking after yourself, to protect yourself. If you've been beaten up, both physically and mentally, if you're not very happy in your job, or you're not very happy in your life or at home, then you have to be selfish to protect yourself. Now, that's very surprising when it comes to spirituality, because generally we assume it's all about selflessness. But think of it this way. There's different ways of thinking about it. So when you're on an aeroplane, the captain goes over the tannoy and says, in the case of a problem, put your own oxygen mask on first, and then put it on your children if you've got children at all. Now, as adults and parents, we automatically think we should protect the children first. But if you think about it, if we put their mask on first before ours and something happens to us, then that child's helpless and hopeless on its own. So we put ours on first to enable us to look after and protect the child accordingly. Now, in the natural world, I was watching a program a couple of weeks ago about lions and lionesses. And this particular lioness was wandering around the Serengeti, or wherever they wander nowadays. And it was hungry. She was hungry, and she had a couple of cubs in tow, and she was looking for food. And eventually, when she killed and found the food, she actually ate the meal all by herself. She wouldn't give anything to the kids, to the cubs. So again, that goes against the natural instinct to protect your children. You think, well, I'll feed the kids first and then put myself second. But if you think about it this way, if she'd have given that food to the cubs and not eaten anything herself, she would have got weaker and weaker and weaker, which would have meant she would have been unable to hunt. So that pretty much would have meant that that would have been the cubs' last meals. So she ate it herself to give her own strength to go out hunting to get food for the cubs, and then she could carry on hunting to feed her cubs. If she'd have done it the other way around, like I said, that would have been the last meal that they'd ever had. So that's the natural world. So if we don't like the word selfish, we can take the ish out of selfish and look at it this way. So we look at the self. And what came out in the research was, it was very much about self-healing. Spirituality is about self-healing, self-reflection, self-awareness, self-worth, self-respect, self-esteem, self-recognition, self-sufficiency, self-responsibility, self-support, and self-control. So suddenly when you start to think about it that way, it makes sense. And all that equals self-development. And this is what the spirituality is all about. It's about progress, not perfection. So it's about developing the self. And not many people do that. They go on these courses, they pay horrendous amounts of money to go to business schools and buy textbooks about how to go about themselves professionally. But personally, what's the point of doing that? Now, the biggest obstacle to overcome amongst all that is self-doubt. So it's that fear factor what comes in. Can I do it? What do I need to do to change? Why should I change when it's the world and everybody else who's wrong apart from me? So it's about overcoming that self-doubt and self-denial, about looking at yourself exactly like I did and go, what is it about me? What's no longer fit for purpose? What worked well in the past? What doesn't quite work now? And it's about that self-development and that perspective of where you are in your life, what you want to do and what you want to be and where you want to go.
So it's also, like you mentioned before, starting by loving yourself, right?
You've got to like yourself, you've got to love yourself, and you've got to learn to live with yourself. Because if you can't live with yourself and love yourself and like yourself, how do you expect anybody else to like and love and live with you? It's fulfilling something you can't do yourself, so how can somebody else do it? So it really all starts with exactly that, is knowing yourself, who you are, being the best version of who you are to enable you to give to other people and to have a healthy relationship with both yourself and other people at the same time, both personally and professionally. Yes.
Is there something specific that the people you interviewed, were doing in terms of spirituality, or some other common denominator that you found?
In terms of work, do you mean?
Yeah, in terms of developing themselves or being on the path, as you call it. Yeah.
Well, as you mentioned earlier on, that actually surprised me as well, because all these people were proclaimed to be spiritual. So I obviously asked them what they did for a living and what they thought about their job and how they applied their spiritual practices, in their work life. And to enable me to do that, I produced a Venn diagram. So there was intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, psychological altruism, and psychological egoism. So if people are that firmly spiritual and looking at the archetypal type, you'd expect everybody to be in psychological altruism. In other words, they work to fulfill the needs and wants in other people, as in servant leadership. But it was very, very far from it. There was people who worked intrinsically to make themselves feel good, like if they're in the caring services, in the caring services, looking after people such as doctors and nurses and things like that. And then just to earn money, to live life and do nice things. Then you had the extrinsic motivation, where it was exactly that. It was to help other people, not quite being paid as much, getting self-satisfaction through providing a service to help other people, which is part of it. So when I took all those participants, both within my research dissertation and my book, there was no clear pattern of where these people were and sat. So in other words, I can't sit here on this meeting and say, yeah, to be spiritual, you'll belong in that particular section or segment, because that's where they all are. Everybody worked and was motivated for different reasons. And this is the key thing, is what suited them. So not what they were supposed to be and supposed to do, but what suited them. And those that were in a section that they didn't particularly like or felt uncomfortable in, they transitioned to other areas. So in other words, if they were working for a big corporate that was a big commercial machine, they didn't like that life. They would take less money and go to more of a family-friendly company, organization, or they would set up their own business, or they would get into another organization that didn't have that corporate attitude, for want of a better phrase, or to get out of the rat race and to have more quality and balance of life. So that very much surprised me, in terms of you couldn't pigeonhole a spiritual person on where they should be working to reflect this misconception of what spiritual people are all about. So in other words, they'd made a decision, they looked at what they were doing for a living, what was important to them, and they balanced their professional life to match their personal wants, rather than be dominated by any particular thing, want, or need.
So what about you? What did you learn from the research and the EDBA that you could apply at work or personally from that journey?
Well, what very much came out of the research was the problem area of managers and leaders. In other words, bullying, their actions didn't match the words, or the words were empty, telling you what to do and not doing it themselves. So that there was a lack of honesty in terms of do as I say, not do as I do. And one particular lady said, look, everybody's great at picking out potential to be promoted and to say they're the next great manager or they're the next great leader. And they get up in the ranks of the organization. But nobody then turns around to them and says, well, actually, you were the great leader and now you're just being a bit of an arse. So there was no calibration in terms of getting there and being there. And one thing very profound came out, say, you can't blame these people because that's how they've been taught. That's how they think they should be as a manager and a leader. In other words, they're not being true to themselves. They think that's what they should be doing and that's what works, but they're not being true to themselves. So for the participants in my research, it was all about being authentic. It was about being human. So in other words, humans make mistakes. Well, I'm sure pretty much yourself and everybody on this call knows that if you make a mistake at work, it can be career threatening. We're all human. We all make mistakes. Now, as a result of that, a lot of leaders and managers are afraid to make decisions in case it's a mistake and they get called out for it. So there's very much a paralysis around progression and making constructive decisions and interesting decisions because of that fear of getting it wrong and that's the end of your job, sort of thing, or the end of your promotions. So it was all about being human, leading by example, accepting that other people are human, that there is a right and wrong, that people do make mistakes. And one of the surprising things that came out, another surprising thing what came out was a lot of groups of people or workers actually didn't want managers. because they felt as though those managers were holding them back. They wanted to give more into the job. They wanted to release the potential, realize the potential. Those closest to the problems are closest to the solutions. They wanted somebody who could guide and help them to overcome the problems in a humane way without being restricted to do as I say, do as I do, and most of it's completely wrong and not being listened to. So they were very much looking for authenticity, actions that match words, a balance, and displaying the difference between right and wrong, and letting people get on with their jobs and being intrinsically and extrinsically motivated, and in doing so. So when we get taken on in our jobs, we get taken on through our CV or resume. And then once we've gone through the interview, that's it. We sat down or we stood up somewhere doing our job against a job description, and suddenly your potential and what you've done and what you're capable of doing is pretty much forgotten about. So you're pigeonholed in this job where you just become automated, you become bored, you become fed up, and that's the parameters you have to work in, and restricted by the people in charge of you who don't want to listen. And personalities come into it. So you could do a great job, but I don't like you, so I make your life a misery. Or you could do a rubbish job, but I do like you, so guess what? You get an easy ride. And people don't like that. They want to be treated decently and fairly.
I just have a couple of questions about the EDBA and yourself in that journey. And by the way, guys, just so that you know, if you have any questions, you can start typing them already in the Q&A, and in about 5 or 10 minutes, we'll be happy, and Steve will be happy to answer those. So first, tell us, I mean, why were you considering an EDBA, Executive Doctorate of Business Administration? Why did you do that?
So this goes back, way back, and I alluded to the fact I came from an alcoholic background, and my parents were good. They just one of those. It's one of those situations, unpleasant as it is. But I was a very clever, bright lad at school, and I didn't apply myself. I was fat and lazy, to be perfectly honest. I was demotivated. I just wasn't really that interested. Happy-go-lucky. So everybody, this comes back to the next great thing, had high expectations of me to get some decent qualifications. Well, I'm ashamed to say that I left school with very, very little qualifications. And I was extremely, extremely lucky to get a job with British Aerospace as an apprentice. And on the day, there was 40 lads, 16-year-old lads all sat in a room, and we got divided up into managers and technicians and engineers and manual workers. And I was put very much with the engineers and manual workers, and this was the ego in me. I was mortified, absolutely mortified, because I should have been with them. Actually, as time gone by, it was absolutely right I went in that direction, but that's by the by. At the time, I was mortified. And I made a decision there and then that I would recover my academic qualifications. And I kid you not, for the last 40 years, every year I've done further education. And some of it's been fun. You know, it might be art, it might be learning another language, etc., etc. But then I'd underpin it with English and maths and business courses and diplomas. And eventually in 2004, I got my MBA. And I thought, that's it, job done. But I really, really wanted to be a doctor, for all the reasons why I've just mentioned, and that was a bit of vanity, but it was the itch from all those years ago. And I wasn't geared up to do a PhD. There was no DBA in those days. It's only within the last few years the DBA and the EDBA has come up very much in vogue. So when I fell upon the DBA in 2014, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And then when I put my proposal in based upon everything we've just spoken about and got accepted, I thought they'd made a mistake. So that set me on the road to realizing my ambition of becoming a doctor with what is the best qualification in the world, I'd say bar none. And that was really motivated through not doing very well at school. Well, good thing out of a bad, in a subject that I'm very passionate and enthusiastic and proud about. Plus I become a doctor. Can't beat that. Where else to go, I'm not quite sure, but you can't beat that.
So we actually met in Paris in 2017, right? And what did you enjoy and what did you find challenging during that process?
I enjoyed meeting people. I'm one of these, I don't like Zoom calls. Needs must sometimes, but I don't like it. I prefer going out there, bums on seats, being with a crowd of people, being taught, where I can smell it, I can taste it, and I can feel that knowledge and that passion. Talking to people, finding out what makes people tick, what they're passionate and enthusiastic about. So I loved getting on an aeroplane and traveling all over the place to the workshops to do exactly that. And of course, learning. I was learning stuff that I'd never even dreamt of. So loved it, absolutely loved it. And I was very, and still am very passionate about what I was doing and what I've done and what I want to do. So the challenging part was I write like a talk, and that's an awful lot. So when it came down to my subject area, when I started doing my research around what was out there and what wasn't out there, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. For all what we've just spoken about, the misunderstanding, repackaged, rehashed, etc. So what was challenging was to take all that. Everything I read was interesting, and everything I wanted to put into my dissertation, because I did a dissertation. Well, there's only so much you can put in, but I had a really good try at getting everything in. So much so, in the end, to cut a long story short, literally, I ended up doing 220 pages for my dissertation. And my professor at the time said, this is really good. That's the good news. The bad news is you've got a maximum of 100 pages. So what was really challenging was cutting it more than half, because I was very close to it and very proud of it. And this is absolutely true. The only way I could do it was to deprive myself of sleep and drink half a bottle of wine, because that numbed me into editing my material down into 100 pages. And that's how I did it. That's the only way I could do it, was to go, I'm tired, I've had a drink, just get rid of it, just get rid of it, just get rid of it. And of course, next day I'd want to put it all back again because I was looking at it in a different light, but we got there in the end. That was okay. The worst part was American English. American English, what, no disrespect, but what on earth is that all about? So all my life I've been taught to write English. You never write American English. And suddenly to have to write American English and present it grammatically the way the Americans do, broke my heart, broke my heart. But I had to do it, otherwise I wouldn't have passed. Oh, it killed me. It absolutely killed me. Putting a comma before an and. I mean, what on earth is that all about? And then, of course, what everybody trips up on is the references, presenting the references in the correct format. How people spot that you've got one word incorrect or it's not in italics is beyond me, but they found me out. So I had to go through all my references, and there was a lot of them, and tidy it up into a format that was presentable. So it's very much the housekeeping side that I found challenging, plus having to discard a load of material on the cutting room floor, the director's cut, to get it down to a succinct format. So that was it. That was the challenging part of it. And then, of course, when it come to an end of spending 5 years, day in, day out, day in, day out, what on earth do I do now? Because suddenly there's a big gap in my life. Then the book came along. So it was day in, day out, doing my book for the next 18 months. Then when that finished, right, what now do I do in my life? Well, do you know what? It's back to work, gonna earn some money and start living a life. So I very much got tied up for 7 years with my book and my dissertation. And that was brilliant, but it's a bit like all you can eat buffet. It's great eating all the food at the time, but eventually you need bigger trousers and you need to go on a diet. You know, you can have too much of a good thing.
So I assume your book was not in American English then?
No, absolutely, absolutely not. Absolutely not. It still haunts me. It still haunts me because everything I was taught at school, I had to do for my dissertation. And I really, really didn't like it. Now, the only thing I got away with was spelling words in English instead of American, like organization and color and realization. So I could spell it the English way and not the American way, but I had to do it the American grammatical way. And that absolutely killed me.
As an avid learner, there's an opportunity, you know, to learn every time. All right, thanks a lot. So let's see. We have some time for Q&A, for questions. I see there's already a question from Fabienne, and please feel free to add your other questions. So Fabienne's question is: how do you suggest to talk about spirituality in business? Which wordings to use?
That's a great question because it's actually quite paradoxical. Because some people are fascinated by the subject of spirituality and some people aren't. Some people don't get it. Some people think you're weird or crazy. You know, what's that got to do with anything? So the best way is not to speak about it. In my way of spirituality, it's about attraction rather than promotion. So it's about leading by example. It comes back to what we were saying before, being human, authentic. And then people realize that you're different. People see that you're different, or there's something different about you. Like in my previous life, if I came across people in the past, they would know there was something different about me, but wouldn't quite know what to put the finger on. And they might ask me and I'll tell them, just like I'm in this discussion now. However, you've only just met me, so you don't know if I'm different, but you're forming an opinion of me. So the words you use it's not so much the words you use, it's the way you use your words. So it's very assertive, it's having boundaries, it's about being nobody's fool, but being kind and compassionate and understanding, where you're a human being leading by example. Because we don't promote this spirituality, we use attraction. And we hope that attraction rubs off and people ask the questions and we can talk about it. So it's a great question, but a very difficult one to answer because it's not like religion where we're promoting it and this is the benefits and all the rest of it. It's about you and how you lead your life. And the best way I can describe it is it's a bit like a petri dish. So a petri dish full of bacteria, and you're the dropper of the antibiotic. And you drop yourself in and you hope that the way you conduct yourself in the way you are has an influence on other people without forcing it upon other people, where gradually that authenticity and that human perspective increases as you come across people. And it won't work for everybody and it might work for some people, but it's really all about who you are and being true to yourself and not being that bullying, that false, that different, that horrible person, but doing your job to the best of your ability and treating people humanely without being anybody's fool. So I think that answers your question. It's one of those, attraction rather than promotion.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? Any other questions? Feel free to type them in.
Have I numbed everybody into silence with this? Are they so gobsmacked, Anne Isabelle, that they just think, wow, what on earth can you ask about such a fascinating topic?
It's the attractions, Steve. They will all buy your book and connect to you on LinkedIn.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a genuine offer. If people have got questions after this, then please feel free to approach me in either way. And it's a huge topic, and an hour doesn't do it justice, obviously. But if people reflect on it and think about it, and it sparked even a bit of interest or a different way of thinking, that's what we set out to do. It's sparking a different way of thinking. It's sparking an alternative. It's not imposed or what you should be and should do. It's about something in this. What's it all about? Let's explore it a bit more.
Yes, and for the brave souls, you can also read the dissertation, at least the last chapter.
Yeah.
So let's see that. Okay, Oliver will think of the questions for his discussion. Okay, thank you, Oliver.
Oliver will think of some humdingers to ask me. I'm sure he will.
He'll throw you a couple of curveballs to check whether you are authentic, human. Do you display serenity, courage, and boundaries, and leading by examples, and all those nice values.
Well, physically attractive. I just need to be mentally attractive now.
Okay, Audrey. When I listen to your story and your continuous intention to add education degrees up to direct reports, I reflect on the difference between being and having. So my question for you, do you have enough degrees by now? Are you enough?
Do I have enough degrees by now?
Are you enough? Yes.
Well, let me just go back to another point there, being and having. There's a big difference between wanting and needing. And in my past, I've wanted stuff. If only I wanted a bigger car, I wanted another watch, I wanted more clothes, I wanted a bigger house. But what you want and what you need is two different things. You need enough to survive, basic instincts of survival. So I was very materialistic, me. So when I'm going through my spiritual program, I've realized I get what I need, not necessarily what I want. And that's around decisions as well. So I'll make a decision because I'm making a decision because I want something. But the universe comes back and goes, well, that's not what you need. We'll give you something that you need. And some of the decisions come out where they don't work out, or I don't get what I want. I get what I need, or the decision doesn't work out. And the trick is with this form of spirituality is you keep making decisions. As I said before, it's not just about positive thinking, it's about action. So we do actions. So with all the best intentions. So the first decision I make might not get me anywhere, and the second and the third and the fourth, but the key is to keep making decisions, because those different decisions might not work out, but eventually through lessons learned and perspective, you get to where you need to be, rather than where you want to be, which from my experience is completely different areas and far better than what I've ever dreamt of. So in terms of I've got enough degrees, I'm going to say yes, but I haven't had enough education yet. I'm sure there's an art course or a pottery course or a different language course that I need to do. So yeah, thank you for that, Audrey. I suppose by definition, I could be Dr. Broadhurst if I keep going on, but I think one executive doctorate's enough. But there you go.
Now, Oliver has got a question. Ego versus intuition, how to know the difference?
Okay, so what I've learned, very, very much so, as I alluded to early on, I was very materialistic. I was the big I am. I was going places. Everything I touched was successful until it wasn't. So I actually thought I was far better than what I really was, because I was surrounding myself by what I thought was superficial success. So my spirituality, sorry, not spiritualism. That was a slip of the tongue. My spirituality is designed to pop the ego and raise the self-esteem. Now, a lot of people who've got super egos underneath it all haven't got self-esteem. They're trying to compensate for self-esteem through other means, shall we say, whether that's buying and selling or power or whatever. So fragile self-esteem, super ego. So my spirituality popped my ego, laid bare my self-esteem. That meant I had to work on my self-esteem. Now, great question, Oliver, because what that comes down to is, I'm just trying to find it again.
Intuition. Oliver's question was ego versus intuition.
Right.
Yeah.
So whereas my participants didn't believe in God, they believed in an instinct. So this is the inherent part. We've all got an instinct, and we override our instinct because we don't like what that instinct's telling us, or the instinct's telling us to fight or flight. So that's the basic instinct at all, as you know, we've all got, but we override it. So for me, I go off my instincts when I'm in tune, and my instincts as a result send me down roads that I don't particularly want to go down. So rather than fight it, I listen to it and I recognize it, and I do what I think is what my instinct's telling me. So that's really what it's all about. What does your instinct tell you? And if you don't like what your instinct's telling you, we all ignore it. If you do like what it's saying to you, then, oh yeah, we'll go for that. The trick is, as we peel away this form of spirituality, is to listen to your instinct and think, rather than have fear, flight or fight, rather than have fear, take an exciting risk. Rather than stay in that situation, the known, let's go into the unknown. My instinct's saying I need to leave here, but I don't want to go because I'm going into the unknown. So yeah, it's a very subtle thing, but it's listening to that instinct and not ignoring it, and sometimes doing what you don't want to do because that's what your body's telling you to do, or your head's or your heart's telling you what to do.
Thank you. So I can see Oliver has more questions, but unfortunately the time is almost up. So it's time to close. You can continue the conversation with Steve later. But before closing, would you have a couple of concluding remarks, Steve?
So rather than me coming out with the concluding remarks, I mean, I saw Audrey there about the degrees and doctorates and do I need them now? Yes, I did, because it was an itch from a long time ago that I needed to scratch. I needed to do that. You could call it vanity, ego, or development, whatever. But yes, I strictly speaking didn't need to do it, but I wanted to do it. So the closing play is I'll leave you with what some of my participants said rather than the world according to me. So I remember Joe, I'm not a new or different person. I'm the person who I have now chosen to be. I am not a person that has been formed or shaped by any other adults or people, just me and my choices. That's your instincts. That's recognizing that you've got a choice and you've got courage to change what you're doing in. There was a new definition that got presented that resonated really, really powerfully with me. Spirituality is an awareness that you are on a pathway that is expanding and that you are moving into different areas of yourself. So it is really becoming aware of who you are and all of what your potential is. And I think that pretty much sums up everything that I believe in, and certainly what my research has brought to me as well. And then maybe it's time to balance both material and spiritual aspirations and integrate them into the business world. What we're doing isn't working. We need to take some leaps of faith and look at things, and maybe a step change into some unknown to present the way we are and the way organizations are, because businesses are there to make money, and that's what they should do. So it's really about controlling yourself, sharing and listening, learning. And the biggest takeaway for me is, look, we've only got one life, and it's about having no regrets. And they did an interview with various people on the deathbeds and asked them what their various regrets were. And none of it was working harder or wish they had more money or whatever. So the good news is, if we start thinking about that now, we've got time to change that now. We don't want to die with regrets. We want to die thinking we've done the best we can with what we've got, taking exciting risks, not having any fear, having a balanced life, and getting on and enjoying ourselves, having the priceless gift of serenity rather than happiness.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing your participant definition, which is a very inspiring one, by the way.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing your findings as well. Thanks, Joanne and the school for giving us the opportunity to share the findings of your dissertation to a broader audience. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening or this morning. And then you will be able to see the recording on YouTube in a couple of days. I wish you all a good day, good evening, and talk to you soon, Steve.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer all the questions, but please feel free to connect with me and we can have a separate conversation or another one of these sessions. But thank you to everybody's time. It's very precious. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope it sparked a bit of a think.
It did. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.